Hey, what's up, everybody, and welcome back. So yeah, I was just basically just got up, getting ready for work, and something I did want to discuss was one of the changes that they introduced for the next patch. Oh, for the longest, players have been complaining about the bleed meta because bleeds were basically here's how it goes. It's real simple with ESO because the developers don't understand how the original game was designed. They don't understand the theory crafting that went into the way the game was designed. For example, originally Magicosaurus were created as a very mobile, high burst class, but they were designed to be very squishy in that you couldn't spam shields over and over and over again. So originally the way damage shields worked was that when you casted a damage shield, the damage shield could not be recasted until the damage shield either expired, and they lasted roughly, I think back then, 20 or 30 seconds, or until the damage shield was destroyed. But of course the damage shields were fairly large, and Sorcs were designed to be very mobile, because of course if you caught them with their damage shields down, they were very easy to kill. So that changed over the years, and then now you have Sorcs, and people who utilize damage shields, and they're basically able to sit there and just keep casting these damage shields over and over and over again right in front of you, take ridiculous amounts of damage, and then of course take forever to kill because they do so much damage. The builds do so much damage that the risk reward, the counterplay, is supposed to be that, of course, if you do really high amounts of damage and you're very mobile, then of course the drawback is that you would be very squishy. And we're not talking about from your average, really low skilled player. I'm talking about in the hands of a skilled player. Magicosaurus are entirely too tanky because now damage shields can be casted over and over and over again, even when they're basically surrounded by multiple opponents. And so it makes a class and a design that is built around high burst and high mobility now has this high level of survivability. And so players come into the game and they're like, whoa, this is really strong, and then they play other classes in the game, like, whoa, like all these other classes are very weak in terms of their defense mechanisms. And this primarily happened because the original developers who came in had a goal and a vision. Once they left, the new developers did not have an understanding of that goal and that vision, and that's why you see the vast majority of these changes where they introduce one change and then it causes ripple effects in other areas of the game. Then they got to go back and then re-nerf it, and then it just on and on and on. And so because ZeniMax doesn't know how to deal with tanks, and because the player community complains about certain characters being too tanky to be killed, they introduced the bleed meta. And so what they didn't understand was that, yes, the bleed meta worked against tanky characters, but then it worked against everybody else because there was no differentiation between this ability or this type of playstyle, i.e. bleeds, differentiating how it worked against medium armor and light armor classes, because it just basically just did damage. It just did raw damage. It bypassed all of your mitigation. And so in this patch, they have changed the way bleeds works, where bleeds will now take your mitigation into account. But what they fail to understand is corrosive armor. So they increased, as you can see here, where is it? Taking a look at the bleeds, they basically increased all of the bleed damages to account for the fact that now they take into mitigation. But then they failed to understand that corrosive armor exists, and then they went and introduced increasing the amount of pen. Whereas originally the way Berserker Strike worked is that it basically gave you a portion of the person's resistance that you were hitting, and then of course now they changed Onslaught. It says it no longer refunds your ultimate cost. It says upon a killing blow, it says instead it converts the physical and spell resistance into physical and spell penetration for the duration, and then they went and increased the duration to 16 seconds, and it longer ranks up in damage. This is basically like Corrosive Armor 2.0, because not only does it do a ridiculous amount of burst damage that bypasses your mitigation as well, but then subsequently it gives you the physical and armor pen of the person, of the amount of resistance that you've bypassed. So if that person has 15,000, 20,000, you now bypass for 16 seconds all of everybody's mitigation, because it's just giving you the pen. This is stupid, because all this is going to do is you can sit there fighting multiple people, dot everybody up, and this is the exact same way that Corrosive Armor works, is where you sit there, you throw your dots on, boom, you pop Corrosive, and now that person has no resistance. And of course they buffed Corrosive Armor to 12 seconds, so now literally on a two-handed user and on a stamina DK, every time you use your ultimate, between 12 and 16 seconds, you're doing true damage. And then they went and increased the amount of damage over time of this ability. As you can see here, Carve got the damage over time reduced for this ability, but in other forms of the bleeds, they got increased. For example, in the dual wield, and in the passive, let's look at not low slash, I want to look at dual wield. Oh my god, my stupid mouse is just not working. See right here, the twin blades and blunt passive says the X bleed from this passive now ticks every second instead of every 2 seconds, so the damage is going to come in faster. And it says increase the total damage by approximately 24%. Increase the damage of this ability and its morph by 37%. And so the only thing that's going to happen is now you're going to have more people who are basically on the OP level of Stam DK, because they gave the exact same ability to basically anybody who uses a two-handed weapon. And it just doesn't make any sense, because all it's going to do is, the whole purpose of the change was to have those abilities target certain playstyles, i.e. the heavy armored super mitigation tanks, which is dumb anyway in terms of PvP, because those players typically don't do any damage anyway. So it's like, what's the point of worrying about killing players who don't do any damage and then just kind of stand there and hold block? It's like, for the longest, people were like, just ignore them. And this happens again, like I said, you look back through the patch notes, they increased the amount of bleed damage on twin slashes, and then on the let me see if I can find where the I know on the 2H passive, on the twin bleed, and the blade, the weapon passive also got increased. Let me see if I can find it here. But anyway, you can look through it. I know they increased the amount of damage that bleeds do, on top of the fact that they changed the way what is it, the Vet Maelstrom Arena dual wield weapons. They increased, I believe they're 1350 on live, and then they went and buffed the extra bleed damage that those abilities do from 1350 up to 1600. So you literally can go, dual wield and 2H on the back bar, pump your 2H weapon once you have your ultimate, and basically do true damage to all your abilities now, not just bleeds. So whatever, every other dot that you have, whether it's like poison injection, or if you have double dot poisons on your back bar or on your front bar, all that is going to do true damage, because you're literally gaining all the physical and spell penetration for 16 seconds. This is from 8 seconds to a maximum of 16 seconds. This is ridiculous. The whole point of the change was to target specific play styles, which is the heavy armored, high mitigation tanks. And this basically is worse. This is worse than what we have now, because they went and buffed all of the bleed damage except for Carve. This particular morph, they reduced the damage of this ability, because I believe Carve, I'm not sure, I forget if Carve has a bleed. I think it just does straight damage on live. I forget, I don't use the ability, but you still have the the heavy weapons bleed from 2-handed. It says the axe bleed from this ability now ticks every second and has had a total damage increase of 24%. So yeah, so between the both passives and of course the ability from Twin Slashes got its damage increased. It's like it doesn't make sense. We're literally, every time ZOS tries to fix something, they end up breaking something. And another good example is the changes to Sword and Board. Because they introduced Broken Necromancer Bash, their solution was to reduce the amount of extra damage that Bash introduces. So literally every other build that utilizes Sword and Board as an offensive weapon set now also got nerfed. And this is what I talk about, where the developers just don't understand theory crafting and don't have a vision for the game, or at the very least the way that they envision the game. This is why you see them, they take one step forward and then they go ahead and revert a patch or two later, because they can't see down the line how these things are going to create problems. They sit here and try to make one fix and then introduce other problems into the game. This will introduce a even stronger bleed meta than we have right now, because you've literally given every stamina build corrosive armor via the 2-handed weapon. Because it says this morph no longer refunds ultimate. It says it converts the physical and spell resistance into physical and spell penetration and increases the duration from 8 to 16 seconds. It's so dumb, because especially because the ability only costs 150 alt. On certain characters, like you can build for a lot of ult gen, especially like for example on a warden or on a necromancer, or to a limited extent on like a DK and on a stamina nightblade. You can build for extra ult gen, and so you literally be doing true damage, because it doesn't take that long to build up 150 ultimate, especially if you're getting any sort of kills, which most people who won VX, who fight low skilled players, are going to be can easily rack up a lot of ultimate. Again, this is primarily taken, and this is what I talked about this in a previous video, where to actually balance ESO and to balance any MMO where you have a wide variety of skills in the game, you can't balance from the bottom up. You have to balance relatively from the top down, because skilled players and players who understand the game are easily going to be able to point these things out, and then the developers are just going to have to waste more development time going back to the drawing board to fix the changes, to fix the problems that they introduce into the game. Which is why you see so many changes to damage shield. This is like the third or fourth patch where they're having to go back into change damage shields over and over and over again, because they're still too strong. Like for example, like say every player who played, especially in no CP, understood that in no CP you don't have a high amount of weapon or spell critical unless you really build for it. So giving shields the mitigation exchange for being able to crit them, it's like in no CP, if you're running heavy armor, you're around 20% critical, which means 70 to 80% of the time you're not critting, you're not doing critical damage, which means 70 to 80% of the time your mitigation is mitigating the amount of damage I'm doing to your shield. So all that did was serve to make shields, much stronger than they were in the previous patch. Everybody who was a pleb and it was like, oh my god, they've nerfed shields, the shields are going to be terrible, sorks ruined. And then the patch came out, and then sorks are even stronger than they were before, because the developers just don't understand how to balance the game. They don't play the game to any sort of high degree, and it's not to insult them, it's just a reality that there isn't anybody who plays the game to any sort of degree, at the very least who is in any sort of position to make decisions, because you wouldn't have seen that change introduced into the game, because it's very obvious for anybody who's played this game for any length of time, knows why shields are overperforming is because you can spam them. because you can span them over and over and over again, and you can layer multiple shields on top of each other. And that wasn't the case in the original design. The original design was that you casted the damage shield and then you had to wait. You were forced to wait out the duration, or you were forced to wait out the damage shield being destroyed. And so it stopped basically people from just sitting there, especially Magic Sorks, from sitting there and clapping their hands over and over again, standing right in front of you, just literally rotating through shields nonstop. And people are like, well, you know, shields are expensive, and it's like, that's bullshit, because even on a no CP build, you're still going to be sitting around 2100, 22k to 2200 region, which is more than enough to sit there and clap shields over and over again. Especially because the damage shields, you know, prior to it, return magicka every time they take any sort of magicka damage. So if you're fighting a mag decay, like literally, and a mag decay works around a lot of damage over time, you're literally feeding the Sork magicka, utilizing your dots on their against their damage shields. And this is what happens because the developers just don't understand how to balance a game, because they don't play the game to any sort of high degree, which is what I said in a previous video, that for them to successfully balance the game where they're not continuously having to go back and revert changes, and for example, the removal of AoE caps. When they removed AoE caps, now you're seeing Zergs are much easier to be dealt with. But previously, when they removed when they put in AoE caps, it's like there was no end to the amount of zerging that went on in ESO, where large groups just literally have no fear of small groups, because they were basically given damage mitigation, because when you hit a group with an AoE, it basically targeted everybody differently, and it had a limit of only 6 players. And of course later on they upped the amount of players from 6 to 12, etc., and then they eventually removed the AoE caps. And it's like, this was the original developers' way of how small groups can handle large groups. Was one, dynamic ult gen, because you have 20 people in a group versus 5, you've got access to 20 ults versus the other group's 5. And so how did they combat, how did the original developers design the game so that people who ran in small groups at the very least had a chance against people who ran in larger groups? And it was, i.e., dynamic ult, and that there are no caps on the amount of people that you could hit. And then once they removed both of those, it was just like, there was no point in not being a large group, because you basically got free mitigation by being in a group larger than 6 people. And this is the same thing time and time again, that the current developers are not theory crafters. They don't understand how to theory craft and how to look down the line and say, okay, we're going to introduce X, Y, and Z. How is this going to affect the rest of the game? They just throw shit in. On paper it looks great, and this is how they balance the game. They balance the game off of databases and spreadsheets, and then later on they go back. It's, you know, perfect example is the fact that they introduced, you know, the extra damage that they put in, for example, on AoE abilities, for example, like engulfing flames, right? And I'm like, why does engulfing flames, it went from like a 3k initial hit, I was like, why is it like 7.5k now with like a 11k dot? I was like, it doesn't make sense, because your spammable was around 11k. I was like, why is my AoE literally like 20% less damage? Like, it makes no sense. The same thing with Nightblade, concealed weapon, and then you look at you know, like their sap essence, and it was like, why is it literally almost the same amount of damage? It makes no sense. This is what happens when you balance based off of spreadsheets instead of basing it off actual gameplay. And ESO is just going to continuously have this problem until they hire someone in any sort of, you know, high-ranking individual in terms of development who understands theory crafting and PvP and is able to balance the game from that perspective, because that person plays the game to that high level of degree where he can say, no, if you introduce this, right? Anybody who plays the game at a high degree will be like, no, this is stupid. this is going to cause further issues with bleeds because you're giving everybody 100% pen, right? Like the whole goal was to reduce the amount of damage that normal players take from bleeds, and now basically you're just giving with one hand and then taking back twofold. But in any event, sometimes you need a break from a game. This patch, it looks like if it goes through the way it is, I think it's gonna be time for a break. Maybe look for something else until ESO gets its stuff together. It's like, as much as you enjoy the game, as much as I've been playing this game for the better part of 5 years, it's like you see these problems coming and you see them a mile away. Anyway, time to get ready for work. Hope you guys have a great day. Thanks for watching. Feel free to like, comment, and subscribe, and check me out tomorrow on Twitch at Infamous NYC. Take care. Have a great day. God bless.